Part number one of the shir tonight. We're in the Gemara on Daf Chaf Tet Amud Aleph, and I have every intention, Amir Tzashem, being Messiah, the Perek together with you tonight via Zoom. Unprecedented. It should be that way. We'll start with the story at the beginning of the Gemara, which is who's who in the mashal of the pouring of the water on the head of the servant or on the head of the master. I am 3 lines up in the narrow lines on page Chavtet Amud Aleph. Mashal al-mar davar domeh. Remember that was the Mishnah had said with that story. Yibaylahu mishafach lemi. Tashma detanya shafach lo rabo kiton al panav. V'amar lo yefsh b'shimushacha. The story is, that's what we have in the Braita, is that the Rebbe, the master, poured the jug on the face of the servant, and he said, I have no desire for your service. After he had requested the water, when the servant came, he had it splashed in his face. So that had to be clarified, because there actually was a little bit of a question. You could have read it as the master had the servant come in carrying a jug, and the servant spilled it on the master, instead of actually being able to fulfill the mitzvah. Some of the Rishonim try to explain how that could be. If you look at Rashi, Rashi just says mi shafach lemi. Already tells you in Rashi, eved l'rabo v'hachika amar mashal le'eved shaya os l'rabo avdut she'ena ovdo kahogen. He didn't serve him properly. Kach b'yadu she'eni sol ovdin keshura. We're not serving Hashem properly. Odilma hachika amar v'shafach lo rabo kiton al panav l'mar tzemi lefanai di'afshi b'shimushecha. So in other words, in the former case, and that's why there's ambiguity, it could be that the servant came in carrying the jug of water and he poured it on the master's head, meaning he was clumsy. He's not really doing what he needs to be doing, and therefore he doesn't deserve to be in the sukkah. I think for most of us, that's why I'm furrowing my brow and even describing it, we understand intuitively that it's the other way. We prepared a beautiful sukkah in which to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the mitzvah Shivat Sukkah, and we get in there and he's pouring the water on our head. A mashal does not necessarily have every element that works out. Because in the mashal, and that's the problem with our understanding, finally the concluding understanding here of the Gemara, which is that typically the water is being brought by whom? So we bring water to Hashem, or Hashem gives the water to us. So he's splashing the water on our face coming from the sky. So if we're splashing the water on him, how is that exactly fit with the idea that we're being thrown out of the sukkah? Whatever it is, again, it just depends which element of the mashal you want to say has a nimshal to it, and which part is just to fill out the story, right? That's
the first one does not.
And in the end, we do say mikol makom in either case. Rashi writes siman klalahu u'mei perush dematnitim mivayalan shvichar akiton maihi yeshivot asukah yiridat geshamin. So that's the question: is the pouring of the jug, is that the sitting in the sukkah part, or is it the falling of the rain part? Which is it? That's actually not accepted by the master. Follow? Right? So which is it? I'm trying to serve Hashem, I'm doing the best I can. He's saying, get out of here. Or is it the very way that the service is happening is no good, and therefore he's saying, get out of here? Either way. By the way, in case anyone's getting nervous, this only applies in Eretz Yisrael. Some say it only applies maybe in a hot clime where it would be very unusual for it to suddenly rain in the middle of or the beginning rather, of Sukkot. But in Chutz La'aretz, where it generally rains as a natural phenomenon all the time, so we do not have the pasuk from Parshat Ekev, that the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kiviyachol, speaking of allegories, Eini Hashem Elokecha, Tamid Elokecha Hashem Elokecha Ba, right? Hashem's eyes, so to speak, means his supervision, his providential watchfulness of the place, and therefore the standard, if you will, to which we are held is not the same thing when it comes to people who live in Chutz La'aretz. That's all. The point is that it's so unusual it's a siman klala. Not clear that it's true in Chutz La'aretz. But having mentioned a natural phenomenon that could be interpreted as something which is a portent of something negative, the Gemara now uses this as the springboard to talk about other natural phenomena, particularly the world of eclipses. And the question, of course, when it comes to an eclipse, is already the question. I'll cut you off at the pass before we even start. The Ben Yehoyada, the Ben Ish Chai of Baghdad, 19th century, writes in his commentary on the Gemara, everybody knows that it's a natural phenomenon that comes in a regular cycle, and everybody knows that an eclipse is not something that is without a very, I'm sort of ad-libbing, but he said we can predict it. We know what's coming. We know when it's happening. So with that in mind, to try to understand, so what exactly is the Gemara driving at when the Gemara wants us to understand somehow that what's going on here in our Gemara is teaching us, I don't know what, some kind of a lesson, I guess, about how to understand the phenomenon. Okay?
If you recall, Rabbi, a couple of years ago, when they had the tsunami, everyone was coming up with their teirutzim as to who had what avera to cause this across the world. And of course, with COVID, all of the so-called geniuses, especially in our world,
right,
who were saying it's because of lashon hara, it's because of lack of sleep.
Right. So this is a very important and very broad and complex topic. The executive summary of the executive summary would be, I am not a Navi, and there actually hasn't really been Nevuah, there hasn't been Nevuah since Malachi, the Navi. There has been, there is such thing as a bat kol, there's such thing as people on such a madrega who have dreams, whatever it is. The tradition that I herald from bristles at the prospect of ascribing tragedy X to reason Y, or tragedy Y to cause X, something like that.
Yeah.
However, we should be mindful of the fact that, as the Rambam himself writes, beginning of Hilchot Ta'aniyot, calamity ought not be met with a sense of happenstance, but rather one ought to think about, even if it's not actually literally the cause, that would require a prophet to be able to really parse out what's transpired and to tell us, but at the same time, to be able to ask, what can we do better? Yeah, how could we be doing better now? Is it a redouble our efforts as a result of something terrible that's happened? So you could pick something that has to be corrected. Rav Lichtenstein Zatzal was very adamant about this. He would not mention names, but he would lash out and say something like, people who don't know how to do an accounting of their own institutions, but to be God's accountant, that they know how to do. So it was very animated about this issue. But we shouldn't make the mistake, and this is why I'm sort of balancing it. It doesn't mean that it's meaningless. It just means we're not adept at knowing what the meaning is. So we'll try to figure it out, as best we can. But here's something else that's happening. Unlike a tsunami, which is not on a schedule, the phenomenon of an eclipse is actually on a schedule. Right? Let me put it on the screen. I might actually see it, so I shouldn't have ad-libbed. Right? Look over here. This is Ben Yehoyada Chelek Bet, courtesy of Hebrew Books. Ve'ina makshim. The lakut chama ulevana hu tiv'i v'nodal tochanim kodem sheyitra'eh. The people who know how to calculate such things, exactly when it's going to happen. Yeah? But then he writes the following. V'nira li, devadai hu bateva. It's true. It's for sure part of nature. Ach, b'zman shia lakut, when there is an eclipse, yitoru lekatrei kein darkam. Nonetheless, when there is an eclipse, there will be some kind of, it is a bad sign because there'll be some kind of awakening of the prosecutorial forces, if you will. Now, What did he mean by it? I'm not sure. What do I understand in it, which may not have anything to do with Ben Yehoyada? It's very simple. When eclipses happen, people act strange. We live in a world that, if you do a little bit of digging, and I don't want to make this a history class, but you'll find that certain battles, even in ancient Greece, were decided on the basis of a comet passing at the right time. And they internalized that as some reason why such and such and such and such. The blood moon, very famously. People act strange. So therefore it's a siman ra, because unfortunately, as the expression goes, the Jews are the canary in the coal mine. When people do bad things and they're unleashed, so often where do they come to vent their rage? We shouldn't know of such things. In other words, it's not as mystical as you think. It's very likely, this is not the Ben Yehudas, it's the angle. It's just, it's in the air. That's how people function, right? That's what they do. So ve'od, nirali, he writes, olam guf ala kut tiv'i. It's true that the actual happening is itself natural. Ach sheyeh yitaveh eze shinui mar'eh b'chama o b'levana, v'zeh shinui nikal l'chol adam. V'rak chacham sheish lem simanim uklalim b'davar zeh, u'b'zeh shinui yesh siman ra la'akum. So he says when the eclipse happens, it's natural, but when it happens, there will be a difference in somehow in the appearance of the sun or the moon, and this change is not perceptible except for the wise people of the world who will understand these things. He means scientists, basically, astronomers, we would say. In those days, it would have maybe even still said astrologers, although astrology was already discredited by the time he lived in the 19th century. But it's a bad sign for the non-Jewish. Gam ma'amar hasheni v'hainu ki l'teirutz rishon tarich lomer k'shaloka b'teva yit'ora mekatshigim l'katshig terich tzasheni yishom shitaveh b'chama marot kashim v'nodaim l'balei chochma. So he said, I gave you two answers here. The first one is more mystical. The prosecutorial forces of the universe are dredged up exactly at the time of the eclipse. The second one is there's actually physically something that changes in the appearance of the moon or the sun, and this is a bad sign for the nations of the world. And that's not mystical at all. So I'm more in category 2, because I don't, just for out of ignorance, I only Asik when you start, I don't understand how there could be a natural phenomenon that occurs with regularity that's somehow a bad sign for the world. But I could tell you, if you look in your history books, I did some research on this prior to this year. So a lot of historical events were governed by and decided by these natural phenomena, and even when they came on a schedule, such as the eclipse, it dredged up all sorts of feelings.
Can I ask a historical question? Did they know at the time of the Gemara that eclipses were regular natural events?
So that was the next thing that I was going to say. Thank you. And that is, I was going to say it for a little later in the shir. I was going to do a little more Gemara, but I'll say it now since you brought it up. I don't know. And I don't think there is any issue with a proud Jew saying that Chazal might not have known the answer to this question.
Oh, yeah, there are tons of scientific things that they didn't know. What's the big deal?
They weren't scientists.
That's right.
Even though we say that the problem is there's a little mission at the end of Perek of it. Hafoch ba v'hafoch ba dekula ba. Turn in it, because everything is within it. But if I find a cancer researcher who is looking in psukim and not using test tubes and electron microscopes, I'm not going to rely on such a person. So, yes, no. I have no qualms saying that there were certain things, scientific understandings. Chazal knew what the science of the day was. By the way, if you're interested in this subject, there's fascinating material on this at the time of the Copernican revolution, when the church, Lahav L'Fei Avdolot, was going crazy, that their whole theology was falling apart. The Maharal of Prague was sending his Talmud, David Gans, to go study with Kepler, the Talmud of Copernicus. It's very, very well known. I'm very interested in this subject because obviously Klal Yisrael also believed in a geocentric universe until Copernicus came along. There's no embarrassment in this. The Torah is 100% true. HaKadosh Baruch Hu left a lot of mysteries in the world, and we're meant to figure it out. on
A
purpose.
flat Earth was still considered an appropriate theory.
Pardon?
A flat Earth was still considered an
Right,
appropriate.
right. And a flat Earth, although Chazal, if you look in Chazal, it's not clear that Chazal believed in a flat Earth ever. That actually, you have Midrashim that does describe it already, but their concept of the world, the concept of science cannot be the same. By the way, just going to mention a cancer researcher, so Zocha to have an oncologist on the line over here. But this is
Only with the right Tillim, that's all.
Pardon?
Only with the right Tillim.
Only with the right Tillim, right. By the way, it's not a contradiction, but the point is, if someone comes to the doctor's office, and there was a time when there was much, we just understood less about the world. Less about the world. I spent a considerable amount of time today, too much probably, daydreaming about kameot.
There are
amulets. Into the 19th century, early 20th century, it's a parchment that has the otiot. Now we believe that the letters of the Torah have kedusha, but people really they would wear an amulet, and the amulet had like certain combinations of letters. This was the understanding of how the world is. This is the understanding of, think about the notion of medicine back in the day, where if the etymological root of the word of the herb sounded like the disease, they must go together. This is what they knew. This was the medicine of the day.
There are even more explicit examples. I mean, the Gemara says beferish that lice reproduced by spontaneous generation.
Right. But the Gemara didn't just say it. The scientists of the day all said it. This is what the understanding. So
yeah,
we should understand. It's no knock chas v'shalom on Chazal. And I'm showing you that just to answer, this is all answering the question that Yehuda brought up, Judah brought up. What did they think? Oh no, Art said it. Art said it. Sorry. What did Chazal think? The answer is we don't know, and it's possible that they did really understand it was a natural phenomenon, but they understood its deeper spiritual layers, or they understood what its net effect was going to be on the rest of the world, and that's a bad sign. Or yachol liyot, that they simply didn't know any more than anybody else, and fine.
Regarding the flat earth, we say, I think in the tefillah, I don't remember where, Hayoshev al chug haaretz. Chug means a circular mechoga.
Yeah. It's already in Sefer Mishlei.
In Mishlei, all right.
Yeah. Sefer Mishlei, part of the wisdom literature of classical. Let's go back to the Gemara.
Yeah.
I think we lost Art. He actually left the room. Okay. Anyway, let's keep going. This is all about the eclipses, and you take it for what it's worth. Like, you're going to see there's going to be other things also which are not natural phenomena. I mean, they are natural phenomena, but they're not with regularity. And Davka the Gemara, to Ronnie's point, it doesn't mean it's meaningless. It just means to be able to say, we know why this happened, or let me explain to you how somehow the victims of a tsunami, 100,000 people plus, somehow guilty of some kind of crime, we don't know what it is, and we're going to decide is so incredibly egregious or terribly chauvinistic to say, well, you know why that happened? It happened because of the Jews. It's somehow about us. There may be a message for us because we're part of a general category called humanity, but right. So let's go. I'm on the wide lines. First one, Tan Rabbanan. Bizman she'achama loka rather siman ra l'chol ha'olam kulo. Mashal ma devar domeh. So another mashal. L'melech basar v'dam she'asa seuda la'avadav v'inech panas lifnehem ka'asa lehem v'amar la'avdo tol panas mipnehem v'oshivam b'choshech. So an eclipse is bad for the world, for the whole world, not just the Jews, the whole world. And what's the allegory or the analogy? It's not really allegory, right? The king invited all of his servants and made a nice meal for them, hung up a lantern, and they upset him. So he blew out the light, he told them, get rid of the lantern, take it out of here. And he left them sitting in darkness. Tanya, Rabbi Meir Omer, Kol Zman Sheme'orat Lokin Siman Ra L'Saneim Shel Yisrael, Mipnei Shemelumadim B'Makoteihem. So Rabbi Meir says that when the Me'orot, which Chazal understand, he did not mean the sun, because that was in the previous example, but rather Me'orot is like Yotzer HaMe'orot, but here meaning the moon and the stars. When they are eclipsed in some way, that's a bad sign for the enemies of the Jewish people. That's euphemistic language to not, God forbid, curse Klal Yisrael. Why? Because the point is Milumadin b'makoteihem, right? That the idea that somehow the Jewish people, we know already a lot about what happens in terms of being punished. So we're compared very often, the analogy of the nations of the world, I should say first, is compared to the sun, and we're compared to the moon. Witness that we use the lunar calendar with the modification by the solar calendar. Ergo, we have to think about both of these factors. The sun problem is a human problem. The moon issue is for the Jewish people. Okay, what's the example? It's that the teacher, l'mashal sofer shabala bet hasefer etzu b'yado, midoeg mishiragel kot b'chol yom v'yom. So if he comes with the strap, another phenomenon that is no longer practiced in schools that I'm aware of, he shows up with the strap to hit the kid. So which kid knows? The kid who oftentimes gets hit knows that he's going to get the beating again. So it's the same kind of thing here also. Midoeg mishiragel kot b'chol yom v'yom. Tana Rabbana bizman shechama loka siman rala ovdei kochavim. Levana loka siman rala sinem shlisol. Same thing, a repeat. Mipnei shisol monin levana ovdei kochavim lachama. Saying the same thing, but saying exactly what I said before with this analogy: Jewish people compared to the moon, and the nations of the world compared to the sun. Loka b'mizrach, a siman rala yoshim mizrach. If it's in the eastern sky, that's bad for the people in the east. B'marav siman rala yoshim marav. Be'emtza rakia siman rala chola olam kulo. Pan of Domin Ladam, a blood moon. Cherev Bala Olam, here comes a war, right? L'sak Chitzi, that looks ashen. It's sort of as if it had some kind of a pallor that is affected. It looks like it's not giving off its usual luminescence. So Rav Bain La'olam. So that's going to bring a famine to the world. L'zeh u'lezu, Cherev V'chitzi, Rav Bain La'olam. If it's going to be both, that it looks red, and also it has some kind of a sachitzi. It's like as if it was covered, like with a goat hair of some sort. That's what it looks like. So then both of those things are coming to the world. Depending on what point of the sun's arc across the sky that it happens, at the sunset or the sunrise, it's going to be fast, it's going to be slow, when it's going to happen. Some say it's the opposite way. Right? So if the nation will be punished, so then its angel will be punished. Some read it as their God, small g, their getchkas, their idols, and that's actually what it means in that context in the pasuk with regard to the Makkah of Makat Bechorot. Right? He's going to make signs. God's going to judge the gods of Egypt. Okay. If you had to take one line and underline it, like with your pen or your highlighter, this was the point. None of these phenomena are actually the fates. Because if the Jewish people are doing what they need to do, then we ought not be scared of any of these things. But if we're not doing what we need to be doing, then we should think, what are we not doing right? And what do we need to be doing right so that we're not impacted by these things? Yeah? In other words, use it as a springboard. Shenemar, Komar Hashem, El Derech HaGoyim, by the way of the nations, Al Tilmadu, Ume'otut HaShamayim, Al Teichatu. Do not learn from their signs. The way of the non-Jews, don't learn. And from the signs of the heavens, do not be afraid. They will be afraid, but you don't have to be. So imagine you're living the time of Chazal, and let's say, for argument's sake, and I don't know the answer here, but let's say, for argument's sake, Chazal did not know there was a natural phenomenon that occurred with regularity. And let's say Chazal really thought that there was some spiritual sign that was happening that was going to have a negative impact on the world and the Jewish people. The point was, they said to Klal Yisrael, but do you understand that you're not defined by that fate. You can get out of it. How do you get out of it? You do what you have to do, and you have no reason to be afraid. Move on. And for a world that was beset by not just astrologers and that power that people ascribe to it, but also these phenomena that were no doubt terrifying for the ancients. So the Chazal just say, just don't be afraid of these things. Do what you have to do, and you'll be all right. That there I find to be an incredibly powerful statement, notwithstanding the signs that these phenomena seem to portend. They're harbingers, but not for you. You can get out of it. Tana Rabbanan. Bishvil arba dvarim chama loka. Here are 4 reasons why the eclipse happens. Al av beitin shemet ve'eno nisbad kahalacha. Val na'ara hamurasa shetzaka be'ir ve'emo shiala. Val mishkav zachor. Val shnei achin shnishbach daman ke'echad. Bishvil arba. Oh, sorry. Let me stop right there. Here are the four things that will cause there to be basically an eclipse, solar eclipse. Again, you'll ask me, but how could that be if it happens with regularity? So 4 things you have to think about. And each one is connected somehow to the notion of a giver and a receiver. The sun is giving off its radiance, and therefore we are the receivers of said radiance. The moon is a receiver of said radiance. So all of these are examples. If the Av Beitin died, and Av Beitin was the one who was the head of the whole Sanhedrin, and people did not adequately give this person their due honor and their respect, so then they don't. The sun itself is going to be impacted, and therefore it will be necessary to give a sign to the people they've done the wrong thing. A ditto in the case of a rape, God forbid. So the idea is that she called out in the city, and no one saved her. Now, technically, the halacha teaches that in the city, if this happened, so people would have heard her, and therefore there must have been some willing component to what transpired. But the point is, no one saved her. They should have saved her, but they didn't. They acted as if she was out in the field. They ignored it. So that's a terrible thing. Mishkav Zachor.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
What was the Av Beitin's role in those days? What was he? What did he do?
So the Av Beitin was the head of the Sanhedrin. Above him was the Nasi, 71. But number 1 was the Nasi. Number 2 was the Av Beitin. He was basically in charge of organizing the Sanhedrin Agadol. He was considered the biggest Talmid Chacham. And the halacha is that when the Av Beitin of the Sanhedrin would die, everyone had to tear Kriya. The Nasi and the Av Beitin and the Melech. So everyone had to tear Kriya, but people didn't take it seriously enough. It didn't mean enough to them. So when such a luminary died, so that's cause for an eclipse if people didn't do what they need to do. The next 2 cases is rape and homosexual activity. So those things also brings the eclipse. And then also 2 brothers who were killed like at the same time. Rashi actually says he doesn't really know why these things should bring a solar eclipse altogether. He didn't hear. But various Achronim have different, they try to line up these things with the idea that something is wrong with the cosmos as a result of these things happening, and therefore it requires some kind of a sign from Shamayim to tell us that something very, very bad has transpired. Again and again, I say, I throw my hands up alongside you, with you, but it happens on a regular basis. So is it to say these are phenomena that happen also on a regular basis that invariably are part and parcel of how the world is? That doesn't make it acceptable, but it's a reality, and therefore we should think, how do we do tshuva as humanity, as Jewish people? I don't know. I'm prepared to leave it with a tzarech iyam.
It's way before your time, but the famous case of the tragedy of Kitty Genovese.
Sure, I know all about it. I've read about it. I wasn't alive for it. So
I was living,
sharing the guilt, but yes.
Yeah, I was living in Brooklyn at the time.
So that's an example, right?
And they still
nobody came to help, and she was killed in the end.
Yeah. They had a half hour to call the cops, and nobody called.
Right.
44 people.
So luckily, there isn't any wanton violence going on in American cities today.
Baruch Hashem.
Thank God. It was only back then with Kitty Genovese. But all right, let's not get political. Moving right along. Let's keep going. So now 3 lines up from the bottom. We shil arba dvarim me'orot lokin. So four reasons why the moon is going to have an eclipse. Al kotve plaster. What's the plaster? That's the person who holds on to their document that says that someone owes them money, and then they bring it out again and say, you owe me money. So I paid you. I still have the document that says you owe me. and they keep collecting on the same thing, right? So Rashi here writes, right? Ishtar mizuyafim umikatvei amal l'sum dofi al adam lichtov bishmo mashalot siva. They represent that people said things they didn't really say. V'amiide edut sheker v'amagali behem adaka be'eretz Yisrael v'alkotze ilanot tovot. The people who testify falsely, the people who allow there to be livestock, particularly sheep and goats, raised in Eretz Yisrael. Chazal made a gzera against this because there were so many that they were eating up all of the grasses. So they made a gzera against it.
It's interesting. Steinsaltz translates it as forger, so it's not just holding on to this thing, but actually forging.
Oh, making it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And okay. Al kotze ilano tovot, cutting down good trees. We shil dal dvarim nichse balabatin imsarin lamalchut. Oh, you know what? I made a mistake. The word is with Steinsaltz. Zatzal. I take it back.
Forger.
Thank you. No, it's only a forger. They look back at Rashi. It's Shtarm Ziyafim Mekatve Amal. It's just a forger, but the forgery is in order to incriminate someone.
Right. It's intended to discredit others.
Yeah, because look at the next line of Gemara. We shil dal dvarim nichse balabatim imsarim lamalchut. For four, on account of four things, is the property of homeowners given over to the kingdom, meaning given over to the reigning authorities. Al mashe shtar peruim. Sorry, that's one. Etzlam. That's to come back a second time. Sorry. Come back a second time and do the collection a second time. Malve beribit, lending on interest. Next page. Ve'al shahaya sipik biyad limchot lomicho. Rashi. Shal balei batim halalu limchot biyad ovrei averet shebedoram shedivrei mishmayim machmat osram v'briot yireim mehem v'lomichu. Unbelievable. This is Rashi writing. Rashi saying the people or Balabatin could have protested people who are doing sins in their generation. They would have been listened to. Why? Because they're wealthy and people would be afraid of them. But they just didn't do it. So for that, you're going to have that their wealth will be transferred over to the king. The loss of wealth is about this kind of an issue. So what do they do also? They're making a big declaration. They announce we're going to give tzedakah. They make pledges. They don't fulfill. They never end up giving to the poor people. Amarav bishvil arba dvarim nichse balabatim yotzlim timyon. So for the four things that come on this list, so the what the balabatim have is going to be it's going to go to waste. It's going to go for naught. It's going to be gotten rid of, right? They'll be destroyed. What's that? Al kovshe schar sachir, not paying a worker. Al oshke schar sachir, cheating a worker. Al shaporkin o me'al tzavareyan, the notim l'chavareyan. They remove the
responsibility, maybe
the yoke upon themselves, and they put it on someone else. Meaning that they it's not just delegating, but it's putting it upon others. In whatever sense. Sounds like could be work, could be other things. Because the next one is Gasud Ruach, is an arrogance. The Gasud Ruach can get Kulan, the element of haughtiness and being full of oneself. That's the worst of them all. That's the worst. And on account of their wealth, actually, Rashi says on account of their wealth. When it comes to the people who are humble, Ba'anavim, for them it says V'anavim Yirshu Aretz V'Itangu Aroth Shalom. So the poor people will be the ones who will inherit the earth, and they will be the ones who will enjoy great peace. Hadron Allah Hayashin. Okay. Shkoyach. Done. Finished the second Perek. So we're going to have other shiurim to get to the third Perek very, very soon. For the duration of tonight, we still have a few minutes. I don't want to let the time go to waste. We still have some time on the clock. So I think we're going to learn a little bit of halacha. That's okay? Practical halacha?
Sure.
Okay. So let me pause here.